This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew Jones and with me today is
Sarah Bolt.
How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. How are you keeping?
Yeah, not too bad. It's that time of year. It's our Christmas episode.
I know. It's really exciting for me because it's my first one.
Is it? It is, isn't it?
My
I'd
first
forgotten
Christmas
that.
episode. Yes. So I'm really quite excited.
Well, like usual, it's our Christmas episodes. We try to make it a little bit more relaxed, a little bit less technical, but still a good conversation for you to listen into. So it was an absolute pleasure to finally catch up with our guest for this year. Many of you will know him. And hopefully you'll enjoy listening to him. But I should say there's one thing I need to correct in there. In it, I stumble and say that England won the Rugby World Cup in 2001, and it wasn't. It was 2003. I can't believe I made that mistake.
And my poor little blonde brain couldn't manage to correct you.
Not your fault at all. And then when I'm going, the Kiwis and the Aussies were all, because they lost, but at least the other one lost as well. That was obviously 2007. I can't believe I was thinking it was 2 years earlier, but there you go. But obviously it's our Christmas episode. So we wish all of our listeners a Merry Christmas, and we hope you get to spend some time with your friends and family and get to enjoy yourself. And it's a relatively stress-free time because, things need to still be done at home and on the farm. So yes, hoping that goes well for you.
It's a Merry Christmas from me too.
And then we've got a little bit of exciting news we want to share, haven't we, Sarah?
We have some more exciting news. I think two exciting things on this episode. Well, the first one I was excited because it was the first Christmas one that I was doing.
Yes.
And now it's something even more exciting.
Yeah, we can't say too much at the moment, but just listen out for our next episode in January. We have got something planned for the new year. Something a little bit different that we're hoping will be of interest to people. And so, listen to our episode beginning of January where we'll give you a few more details. But until then, let's go and talk to our guest and enjoy the conversation. This podcast has been brought to you today by Chewing the Cud Limited, who offer completely independent dairy and beef nutrition, cow signals advice and training, along with ROMS mobility scoring. For more details on these and other services available, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on nutrition@chewingthecud.com. Chewing the Cud Limited now offers first aid training from a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Sign up to our website, www.chewingthecud.com, for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode.
And links to our socials, including Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast. All one word, and remember, no G.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome to Tunicud Podcast. Today we have a guest that I'm absolute pleasure to have with us today. I first met him a good few years ago now, I guess it must be, just as he was finishing an AHDB talk at the time, a farm locally. And we got chatting. And then who I was working for at the time did a nutrition meeting, and we had himself and Dr. Brian Vernon come and talk to us as the speakers for that meeting. And then obviously he's gone overseas and have followed his career. And interestingly, I met one of his students a couple of years ago who's been a guest on here, James Wilson. The first thing I said to him is, "That's our guest's work you'll base that on." He went, "Yeah, it is, and it builds from there." So it's an absolute pleasure, because I think his work is very under-referenced personally, to have Jon Huxley with us. Good morning, Jon. How are you?
Good morning, Andrew. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. And how is it in New Zealand?
Honestly, really great. It's a very strange thing moving to a different part of the world, but I've had to come to the dawning realization that I actually make a better Kiwi than I ever did a Brit. And that is, honestly, it's a really weird thing to have to say, but I'm afraid it's absolutely true.
It definitely is an experience moving halfway around the world, isn't it? Having obviously lived in Oz for 10 years to change from here to there, it's the same but different. And until you do it, people don't quite realize what it is.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right, and it's a fabulous part of the world. It is. It makes sense. A Brit down here, Australia, New Zealand, everything makes sense. Everything is easy, apart from the little bits and pieces, and that's one of the things that makes it great. But then it's also entirely different. We just love, the entire family just love New Zealand. We're outdoor people, and as anybody who's been here will know, New Zealand is just the most amazing place. So we spend as much as time as possible in the great big outdoor playground that is New Zealand.
It sounds fantastic. It makes me think my biggest regret of my life was that I got, when I was at uni at Y College, we were offered the opportunity to go for a year to Massey, and I never took that opportunity. It was the 90s. And traveling to New Zealand wasn't sort of the done thing. And as I say, the more I've gone through life, the more I've regretted it.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you are currently Dean and Head of School at Massey University. Now, I mean, all I particularly know about Massey is I believe my vet in North Queensland went to Massey University and might have even done a bit of teaching there. I can't remember. That's obviously going back a little bit. But Jon, as we usually do, tell us about yourself. How did you get to New Zealand? What's your career been up to now to make that change?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I was born and bred dairy farming in North Wales. So my dad was a third generation on the family farm. I've got actually both brothers now farming family farm, and it's just starting to look like it'll transition to our fifth generation with their kids. So we were just a dairy farming family from North Wales, and I always said that I was either going to be an accountant or a vet, because those were the sorts of people you saw. You know, we had limited exposure to the outside world in rural North Wales. So I had a fantastic mentor, a vet called Keith Senior from Berkeley Moor Partnership in Whitchurch, who really became my great mentor when I was a student, and he set me going on vetting. So I left rural North Wales in 1990 and went into the middle of central London to the Royal Vet College, which was a massive culture shock, which still makes me smile. I just did vetting, really. So graduated the mid-90s wanting to do dairy. I have vaccinated a dog once in my career. It was traumatic for both sides. I've just done dairy all the way through, really. So I had 12 months at Bristol after I graduated, then 3 years in practice in North Wales at Daleside, what was called Daleside Veterinary Group in Wrexham. And then went back to do a PhD, actually. Keith, so this great mentor, Keith Senior, I remember him stopping one day. We were driving around the dairy farms of Shropshire, and he stopped. He pulled over, which he often did when he got something important to say to me. And so Keith had pulled over, and he looked at me, And Keith would have been in his mid-50s at the time, and his shoulders were gone because he'd done dairy his entire career. And he said, look, if you want to do this, you need to promise me something that you'll future-proof yourself so you don't end up like me with shoulders completely shot in your 50s. And he said, you need to future-proof yourself. So Keith told me I've got to do a PhD, even when I was an undergraduate. So I did what Keith told me, and I went back to academia, and then actually have never left. So I found my calling in as an academic vet. So I worked at Bristol Vet School, and then as one of the foundation staff on the new veterinary school at Nottingham. And then one cold November day in 2017, I was sitting in my office at Nottingham, and a very interesting job advert came across my LinkedIn feed, and it was for the job at Massey. And within 6 months, we'd sold up our life in the UK and moved our then 4 and 2-year-olds, and we moved to New Zealand in April 2018. Been there 7.5 years.
I say, has it been that long now?
Time goes, doesn't it?
It does. That makes me think, when did we meet? When did you do that talk for us? Blimey, that must be back. That's going back a little bit. What was your PhD in at Bristol?
So I actually, the mastitis was my original PhD. So I did the licensing trial that became the work that got Orbiseal, the teat sealant, licensed in the UK. That was my PhD. So I was always originally mastitis and dry period control. And the reason I got into lameness was when we moved to Nottingham, my great collaborator, my great academic collaborator, Martin Green, and I both ended up at Nottingham. And as I'm sure you and many of your listeners will know, Martin has done a huge amount of the work with Andrew Bradley on mastitis in the UK. And I just made a strategic decision to go, we should broaden this, because if we're both in the same place, and I went, well, lameness has been completely underdone. And so I took a shift and took a punt on giving lameness research again.
So that was simply, it was almost finger in the air. We're concentrated here. Let's broaden what we're doing. Lameness looks a good choice.
It was that or reproduction, wasn't it? Anybody will say, the big three: infertility, lameness, and mastitis. And I was much more interested in lameness than I was infertility. So honestly, there was nothing more to it than that.
But the work you've done has been great on that. But how's it been in New Zealand in, what do you say, 7.5 years since you've been there? Obviously you didn't start as dean and head of school, did you, at the time? Or I don't know. How that was your career? That was your position straight in New Zealand.
Yeah, so I was recruited into effectively the head of school role from the UK. So it's been great. We love New Zealand. Massey Vet School is a really great school. We've got a really good reputation globally, global reputation for producing work-ready, practical, down-to-earth graduates, which in part is down to the Kiwi attitude, and partly just because of how we've always taught veterinary science at Massey.
So what are the main differences, do you think? Can you put your finger on what those main differences between how you do it at Massey versus, say, our vet schools here in the UK?
Oh, yeah. And I'd say a few things. I would say, first off, it's partly down to Kiwi mentality. The Kiwis just get on and give it a go. There's a phrase in New Zealand called the number 8 wire mentality. So number 8 wire is the classic fencing wire in New Zealand, but of course can be used for absolutely anything. It can be repurposed for a million tasks. And so in part, it's that number 8 wire mentality. And I'm sure, honestly, that's because New Zealand is still so close to founding. It's not that many generations when New Zealand farms and New Zealand was being cut out of the bush, and the bush was being felled, and the farms and the country were being formed. And so that still hangs around in the Kiwi mentality. So Kiwis will just get on and give it a go. So I think that's part of it. And of course, alongside that, kiwis also travel. That you'll find kiwis all over the world because they just travel. And then probably in terms of what we do, it's always been quite a practical applied course. And in part, that's down to Massey's history. So Massey was founded as New Zealand's agricultural college, 98 years ago. Actually, we're coming up to our centenary. And we are so well endowed with facilities. So we've still got 8 farms at Massey, 2 dairy farms with 1,000 cows, which is just now unheard of in the UK for the level of access to farms that we have. We've got a deer unit, a dog unit, a cat unit, beef and sheep units. We've just got all of those facilities, and that really helps, obviously.
But I know what you're saying in terms of almost frontier spirit, isn't it? Because I mean, when we were in North Queensland, that had been at the time, that had been cleared like 80 years at the time. It's probably about 100 years now. And I mean, some of the farm at the time had only been cleared 10 years. And you looked at it and went, why was this even cleared? Because of the topography of the land. It was just like, some of it still was scrub. It was bush, basically, that you just didn't go in. And if you didn't move heifers, say by 9 o'clock in the morning, you didn't have a chance because they disappeared in the scrub and didn't have a chance to get them out.
No, it's absolutely right. And of course, the other thing that plays into it is that the population density is in New Zealand. It's a land area bigger than the UK with 5 million people on it. And actually then over 1 million of those are in Auckland. So, the rest of the 2 main islands, the population density is really low. And so you have to get on with it. In rural New Zealand, there is nobody else around. And so if you don't sort it out yourself, nobody's going to come and help. So, and, that plays out in Kiwi mentality. So, people will still stop. If you broke down in New Zealand, you'd get bored of telling people you didn't need help for the number of people that would stop and offer to help.
But you're right in terms of population. I remember one of the Kiwis come working for me. He'd been Brisbane, I think, before he came to me or something like that. And it was like, there's like 1 million people, whatever Brisbane was at the time. I can't remember. And it just blew his mind that there was that many people. So we sat him down and said, don't ever go to London. And he's like, why is that? I said, because there's 8 or 9 million people in all of London. And he was just, that there was twice the population of New Zealand just in one city, just blew his mind. And he just couldn't comprehend with it. But yeah, like, as you say, it's a different thing. The other thing, maybe I should or shouldn't say this, it was quite funny when I was in Australia. All the jokes people make about the Welsh here and sheep, they make about the Kiwis and sheep. It's exactly the same jokes. You just replaced Welsh with Kiwi and vice versa. So, but yes, it was always good fun. Always good fun.
There is a healthy rivalry across the Tasman between Australia and New Zealand.
Well, you say that. I mean, the Kiwi, they say he got a bit offended whenever when those jokes kept made up, and his excuse was that it's really an Aussie that got caught. And when he got asked who he was, he said, "Oh, I'm a Kiwi," and that's why all the jokes came around. As you say, there's always a good healthy rivalry. And the other good one that always remembered me was what World Cup would it been? England won the World Cup in 2001, wasn't it, in the rugby? And 2005, we didn't look like we were going to do very well. In the end, we'd end up getting to the final. And the next morning came in, England had won. Yeah, happy days. Was it quarterfinals? And the Kiwis were like, oh. But at least the Aussies didn't win. And then you saw the Aussie members of staff and they were like, oh. But at least the Kiwis didn't win. And I'm like, yeah, but England did. And love the fact that we got to the final. Yeah, we got thrashed, was it by South Africa, I think it was. But the point was no one expected England to get that far at that point. And I just kept going, well, we are still the World Cup winners at this point. And then anyway, we managed to keep going further than both them. It was quite an amusing time, but yes.
So going back to your PhD, Jon, did you ever think at the time how important teat sealers could become, and sort of now the role of teat sealants in the control of mastitis and in the reduction of antibiotics and everything else? Did you foresee that when you were doing that work, or?
It's difficult to look back, isn't it? It's the retrospectoscope is an amazing tool. I think we realised at the time what what the product was. You know, and again, that's originally a piece of Kiwi ingenuity. Teat seal, all the original teat seal work was done in New Zealand, and I think we thought. I think we realised it had got a huge amount of potential. We hadn't quite got the pressure on antibiotics 25 years ago that we certainly do now. But even then, if you really sat down to think it through and to just to really think through the potential and what it could do, and then, of course, the real advantage was that all the data started coming out showing that actually, in straight comparison, in uninfected cows, it was as good, if not better, than antibiotics. And so, you know, once we got the data, you just go, well, this surely is a no-brainer. And it still makes me smile that it's taken 20 plus years to get to the level of market penetration that probably it should have got to. It's really clever technology. It's really good product.
I think it's the only rumour target that we're not actually meeting, I think, in the UK. I think all of the other targets, all the rumour targets we've met with, you know, sort of dry cow tubes, milking, lactating cow tubes. But I think it's just the use of teat sealant still hasn't quite reached the rumour targets, which is quite interesting, really.
So my favourite story about my PhD is before we started the trial, we were just going out, starting to get used to. I was clearly I'd done a lot of milk. I'd milked a lot of cows, and I'd done a lot with cows, but just getting used to administering the product. And in about the third cow that I injected the product into, she kicked, and she managed to trap my finger between a hock and the bar in the parlour, and smashed the end of this finger into about 17 different pieces. So I started my PhD with my first finger all strapped up. Hurt like hell.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great product. I mean, I remember first using it North Queensland. I think we tried it before we knew we were going to Victoria, but tried it. So, you know, because we obviously want that extra protection moving those cattle 2,000 miles. So that would have been, when did we move there? 2004. So it must have been early 2004. Probably tried it, but obviously it was antibiotic and then teat sealant. I certainly remember the first couple of cows, like, oh, this is a weird bit of mastitis. And then you realise, and it sort of just rubbed like toothpaste on the deck of the platform. And like, oh, it must be the teat sealant. And then it just went from there. And then so any dry cows that went down to Victoria, we made sure they had teat sealant as well to give them that extra protection. I mean, it's a great piece of product. And I'd say at the time, as you say, there wasn't the antibiotic pressure. So antibiotics and teat sealant. So sort of double hit. But now it's a different ball game, isn't it?
It is. No, it's exactly right.
So then, obviously, that was your PhD. What then drew you to Nottingham? The fact that they were starting the vet school, and there was the opportunity to go forward from there.
Yeah, that was literally it. I was at that point in my career. I was sort of I'd cut my teeth, and I was in that really sweet spot in your career in your early 30s where you feel like you can change the world, and the opportunity to start be involved in starting a new school was just too good to miss. You know, at the time, it was the first new vet school since Bristol had been founded more than 50 years previously. So it's not like those opportunities had come up very often. So no, and the other thing was the founding dean, actually still the head of school, Gary England, had taught me at London when I was an undergraduate. I'd known Gary for a long time, so I'd got a lot of faith in Gary. So I went up to Nottingham. That was fantastic time. I loved starting the new school at Nottingham. It was great fun.
So that'd be a lot of fun, being, you know, feet in first and starting from the ground up. Must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly right. Blank sheet of paper, being able to just go, actually, we don't need to do this, to replicate what's always been done. You know, the opportunity to start from scratch with a blank sheet of paper, you know, that doesn't come along very often. And so it's just a really good point in my career. Loved it. Really proud of what we achieved founding the new school at Nottingham.
So having chosen lameness as your direction of travel, who would have been your, I guess, mentors at the time, or who would have been your influences in terms of what you decided to look at, where you decided to go? I guess the name, obviously, Roger Blowy's mentioned quite a lot over here. You know, what guided you initially once you'd chosen down that path?
I think what was, and it's actually, to be fair, it's true of an awful lot of veterinary medicine, is that when you really scratch through the thin veneer of evidence that we think we have behind a lot of what we do, you realize that it's very superficial. And lameness was one of those ones where there was a lot written about lameness, but very little research base underpinning what was written. And that's not saying that, what's written in textbooks was wrong, but we didn't know it was right. And there's in science, that's a really key and critical difference. And so one of the things was that the evidence base for what we were doing in lameness was just so fundamentally lacking. We were making some assumptions, and it's anyway. If you look back on the history of our understanding of clawhorn lesions in cattle, it was all based on a really it really wasn't based on much. There was very little underpinning it, and so that's really how I ended up there.
I was going to say, I should say I had the pleasure of meeting Roger for the first time sometime this last year when he gave a talk, and he's a fantastic talker, well worth listening to if you ever get the opportunity. But it's interesting. You say lameness has changed a lot just in my lifetime. I was talking to a son of a client the other day, and I said, that's where I remember as a child, so probably 45 plus years ago now, didn't have a crush. Cow was just tied up at the front, leg over in the leg, over the beam of the old stone shed that was there, and the cow swinging itself around as my father tried to sort out whatever a lame problem was. And I remember then having a first crush, and me and my sister playing with it. We must have only been, I don't know, 6, 7, something like that. This wonderful thing of crush. I mean, just how much things have changed in my lifetime in terms of the practicalities, let alone the research from your side of things and what that's brought to it. But just the safety on farm as well for the cow and for the operators, isn't it? I mean, from having a cow that just swings around when its leg's over a wooden beam compared to some of the crushes you've got these days is a massive change.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But, I think the other thing we have to remember about lameness is a production disease. It wasn't when I was a kid in the late 70s and early 80s. We used to have the odd lame cow. You'd be pushing him in the afternoon, and there'd always be 1 or 2 stragglers. But it wasn't the problem in the old 5,000, 6,000 litre British Friesian. It wasn't the problem that it is in the 8, 10 plus 1,000 litre Holstein. And that's partly down to production, but it's also partly down to exposure to concrete. Concrete from a cow perspective, concrete is hideous stuff. There is not a single cow in the world who would choose to walk on concrete. And of course, as our systems have intensified, we've exposed them much more for longer periods of time to concrete. Concrete is for our benefit. It's certainly not for theirs.
Oh, completely. And if concrete's done wrong, it can be a horrible job. I know myself as somebody that they, when they put the new yard in, they went and used one of those hexagon patterns, which is, fine. But the builders did it much too deep, and the problems that causes cows walking on it is just horrendous.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, the cow's foot has never been designed to walk on such a hard surface. It's from what we understand, and it's quite interesting because we don't really understand the evolutionary history of cows, but they seem to be that sort of arboreal, sort of plain stroke forest dwelling ruminant species. And so they've always been on much softer underfoot surfaces. So, millions of years of evolution have got the foot to the point where it's designed for that sort of walking surface, certainly not for something like concrete.
Yeah, I did a cow signals this week, actually, and they'd got, when they built the shed 6 years ago, they'd inlaid rubber matting all along the feed fence. And just since I broke my ankle a year ago, I just feel those differences so much more acutely than I ever did in the past. I didn't used to worry about it, but a slight bit of broken concrete these days, I feel it. And it was just so nice underfoot walking on this rubber rather than walking on the concrete as we were walking along the feed fence. But I mean, I obviously know you for your work as hold on, let me get this right because I always say it the wrong way around. Do thin cows go lame or lame cows go thin, but you must have done some work before that, I'm guessing, at Nottingham. So what did you start at in terms of your research at Nottingham when you started looking at lameness?
Yeah, so I think and again, it was AHDB Dairy at the time, and I'm really grateful to AHDB because they funded an awful lot of the work that we did. But we started talking to them about lameness being an issue for the industry, and identifying that there really wasn't a lot of evidence base underneath what we were doing, and they sort of challenged us and said, "Well, prove it." So we did some literature reviews for them and just demonstrated how little evidence there was behind a lot of what we were doing and our thinking. And honestly, that was the real start for me. And then I got on my hobby horse around the acidosis-laminitis story and as a cause of clawhorn disease in dairy cattle, which I'm still sure there'll be people who disagree with me, but I'm a really strong advocate for saying we need to just drop that as an underlying theory, because it turns out it was effectively, you can trace all of that story back to a single PhD student, a guy called Nielsen in the 1960s, who did some really initial work initially on horses actually, and laminitis, and then we ended up with this weird. It's not weird. A lot of extrapolation leading to acidosis and laminitis becoming the predominant theory for the development of clawhorn disease in cattle. And it just took over all the textbooks from the 1960s onwards without really having any good scientific research underpinning it. And so that was the starting point for me.
That's interesting, because I heard something similar about heifer development. I was at a conference last year, and what's his name? Alex Back was speaking, and he made some comment about, that everyone says, oh, you can't push your heifers too much because they get fat, they don't produce. And he said that's down to one paper with about 10 animals in, and that has dominated the headlines for the industry for the last, I don't know, probably all my life, 20, 30 years easily. And he said, it's just rubbish. You need to push them. It doesn't. And so you're saying effectively that's the same thing. It was one paper has just dominated that headline within the industry for a long time.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's no malintent here. There's nobody deliberately trying to deceive anybody. But also, we don't get the investment that, say, human medicine gets. In human medicine, there's so much more money going into research. So you end up with hundreds of papers on really small areas of science. And we just don't get that level of funding in dairy science. And so, single papers and small studies can become overrepresented simply because they're the only thing that is available. And so it's not, it's perfectly reasonable and rational. But unfortunately, sometimes that it proves not to be correct, or it's, as you identified, it's a small population in a different location, different part of the world, different animals, different genetics, and you just can't extrapolate.
So going back to AHDB and the work that you were doing under their funding, and sort of led to the healthy feet project with AHDB, what role did you take in that?
Yeah, so I was one of the people doing some of the work. I mean, clearly that's been a huge effort from a large range of people over the years. There was a really good lameness group at Bristol in the UK back in the day, and they started a lot of this. And with all these things, it's always it's a real team effort. And so certainly I put in some of the original work and was deeply involved at one point in my career. And again, I'm really proud of where we got to, because I really feel like we moved lameness forward as a subject, because it had been underrepresented in the literature. It was underrepresented in management practice on farm, but it was causing big problems. And so it was great to see where we got to and where it has got to since.
And talking of Bristol, Nick Bell would have been one of the main sort of leading at Bristol, and he again has gone to the other side of the world as well. So we've lost two huge lameness experts to the other side of the world.
Yeah, John Webster, David Main, Becky Way, and then Nick came in as a PhD student at Bristol, and Nick's moved to Murdoch in Perth, one of the remotest places on the whole planet. Holy moly, Perth is remote. I think it's interesting when you live down here. I don't think, unless you've been, you do not realise how big Australia is. It's just vast. And then the only place of any consequence in Western Australia is Perth. And it's a great place. It's a great place to visit, but it's a long, long way from anywhere. So good luck to Nick and his family.
As you say, you can't comprehend. I mean, Australia's as big as the US. And I remember some friends coming to see me and they said, "Oh, what do we do? Fly into Brisbane?" This is when I was in far north Queensland. I said, "Well, you can if you want, but I'm not picking you up." And they went, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's a 24-hour drive straight from where I am down to Brisbane to pick you up. You can fly into Cairns and I'll pick you up from there. That's only 2 hours." But the flip side, I remember a friend in Queensland was going, "Oh, you must know such and such in London." "Well, why would I know such and such in London?" He said, "Well, it's only 2 hours away from where you live." No, where it's funny, like you're saying, it might be like Australia might be a vast place, but particularly like in the Holstein breeding, as I was into, you knew people all across the whole country. It didn't matter where they were. You knew, if you didn't know them, you knew of them, or you knew someone that did know them, or you touched base with them at some point. And yeah, over here, you wouldn't have a clue who was up in Cheshire compared to down here in Dorset, or it's just a whole different ballgame. You don't comprehend it unless you've been there. It's just completely different.
Yeah. No, so Perth from me in Palmerston North in New Zealand. Well, the east coast of Australia is 2 flights. So I've got a flight to Auckland, which is an hour, and then it's 3.5 hours across to the east coast. And to get across to Perth, it's sort of 10, 11 hours. It's a very long way. And the biggest problem with Perth is that their time zones don't match with anybody. I mean, they can't talk to the UK, they can't talk to the US, they can't talk to us because it's so they don't align with anybody.
No, it's that in Tasmania, WA and Tasmania, the only place I never actually went to when I was in Oz. But what I always be told is they're a different breed in Western Australia compared to out on the east. But hey, that's a whole different ball game.
They're now a very rich breed, mind, from what they've dug out of the ground in Western Australia.
I know in my time there, the Aussie government was struggling because whereas the East was struggling, not quite on recession when the rest of the world sort of was teetering, it wasn't. But WA was just marching ahead, as you say, because of all the mining, or what they've mined out of there has made them fantastic amount of money.
Until you're down here, I don't think, I certainly had no idea when I was in the UK just how affluent a country Australia has become over the last 20 years. Their economy has done absolute gangbusters. They didn't go into recession through 2006, 2007. They powered through that. They've grown continuously for 20 plus years now. They really are an affluent country now, Australia.
Well, so a lot of that was off the back of the mining, as you say, out of well, it reminds me, I mean, when I was there, they used to keep saying that New Zealand was going to be the next state in Australia. And they were saying that the whole time I was there, but it still hasn't happened.
Well, it was always the original plan, apparently. New Zealand was always going to be a state of Australia. And then it never happened.
And I was never aware that was part of the original plan. I just thought it was a little bit of the old niggling between the Aussies and the Kiwis, to be honest with you. So going back to you mentioned the acidosis, and that's probably what started you down. I mean, that's what I knew you for, was that your work on do thin cows go lame or lame cows go thin. Was there a sort of a step in between, or that's what drove you to then go and do that work with AHDB and move it forward?
Yeah, I mean, to be absolutely clear, and as with all science, it's always building blocks. So there was some work that came out of the US that started looking at this interaction between the digital cushion and the fat in the digital cushion and how that was linked to body condition score. So we certainly didn't start that area. We just picked up and ran with it because the digital cushion story dates back to some really fantastic anatomical work that came out of Germany probably 15, 20 years ago now, that first described the digital cushion. And then a group in the US had done some really interesting work looking at the relationship between fatness or condition score and the thickness of the digital cushion, and we just picked up and ran with that in the UK context, and did just built on that and did a lot more of the work looking at that interaction and looking at how the digital cushion functioned and what it looked like when we imaged it with CT and then MRI, and we just added some building blocks to that story, and I'm pretty convinced we're right with that thinking. But like all science, it's never complete, and the story, people keep building on that story as time goes on.
Well, I was going to say, I'd sort of mentioned it in the introduction. I personally think it's a piece of work that's never referenced enough. I mean, or exposed enough, maybe, because I know it's certainly something I often come back to when I'm on farm, and most people have never even heard of it. And I just think it's such a shame. I just think that it makes so much sense. I remember you come say, I think you gave us the world premiere at the time with the information and that talk that we did. And it just makes so much sense to me. And it's just so many people out there when you go, so is it do thin cows go lame or lame cows go thin? And they're like, oh, it's got to be lame cows go thin. And like, no, there's this work and it's does this. And they're like, oh. And I said, usually I guess my question is, do you have, if you get a lot of sole ulcers, that's something I would look from, I guess, your work, look at your nutritional point from it. It's not just that, but that massively comes into it. But you're obviously in New Zealand now. You've said it, probably haven't said it in podcast, but you've said it to us, you're not doing actual hands-on work these days, are you? You're more a bureaucrat, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm absolutely a bureaucrat, I'm afraid, Andrew. That's just how my career has gone. And I like to frame it as I can have more influence now in a leadership role and in looking after the education of the next generations than I could before. So it's been really positive.
Do you miss that research? And my question was going to be, how is lameness, or how is this perceived in New Zealand? I mean, a different system, more extensive grazing, longer walking. But I mean, I suppose there's two questions there. Do you miss not doing the research? And how is your work, or how is lameness perceived in New Zealand compared to over here?
Yeah, do I miss it? Yeah, I do. But one of my great challenges in life has always been I get bored really quickly. It's one of my failings, and so if I do something for 5 or 6 or 8 years, I then go, oh, I've got to do something different. And so I felt like we'd done the lameness research really well, and there were some great people coming in behind me. James Wilson has been on the show again, but fantastic. James did his PhD with us just as I was transitioning to New Zealand, and has really picked up the baton and run. So do I miss it? Yeah, I do. But I really enjoy what I do now. I really do enjoy what I do now. It's been a huge new challenge, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
So then the second question was, how is lameness in New Zealand?
Yeah, and again, you and your listener will appreciate just chalk and cheese in terms of system. The New Zealand system is a small light cow on lower yielding, really extensive. They are walking a long way on tracks, on laneways to the parlour. It's really difficult. I have to keep changing between New Zealand parlance and UK parlance now, because the parlour's the shed. It's really weird. So you bring the cows to the shed. You don't bring them to the parlour.
Exactly, dairy shed, exactly the same. Or you were talking about earlier, I know we're getting distracted, but I was having this conversation the other day. When I was working, I had Kiwis, Aussie, and a Romanian working for me, and I said I want an adjustable spanner. And they looked at me. I said, well, I want an adjustable. And they're like, what? And I went, yes. I went and got one, and the Aussies went, oh, you mean a shifter? Okay, whatever. And the Kiwis went, you want a crescent? What? And it's just, as you say, it's just it's the same, as I said right at the beginning, it's the same but different. It's just learning those different nuances of the phrase of when you're talking, how you phrase a different word for the same thing. Like you said, here it's parlour, over there it's shed or dairy or whatever it happens to be. It's all the same thing, but yeah.
Jib stopper is the really weird one. A plaster in New Zealand is a jib stopper.
Right. Well, it's a bit like I was talking to Laura Audrey, who's a Kiwi, the other day from AHDB, and we were I was on the cow signals course actually, and we were talking about. She goes, "Oh, I wear my flip flops." I'm like, "What?" I said, you can say the right word. I know what you mean when you say jangle. She went, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Oh, because guess we can talk about the Aussie version, thong." She goes, "No, we're not talking about thongs." You know, it's the same thing, but everyone calls them different. In the same way, when I was over there, some neighbours used to laugh because I always used to go and ask them if I could borrow their Hoover. And they're like, "You what?" A vacuum cleaner. But the flip side of there in Australia, a power washer was a gurney. So you always used to have to have the gurney in the same way as Hoover. It was the original brand. So that's what everybody knew things as.
So bring a plate is the other thing that classically confuses Brits in New Zealand. So when we first got down here, we got invited to an event and they said, "Oh, bring a plate." And we were going, what do they mean, bring a plate? They can't possibly be short of crockery. You know, what is this, bring a plate? And but again, that's just bring a plate of food. So it's a sharing meal, but it's all those differences.
My mother did that the first time we were asked in New Zealand. She was like, "What do you mean? Do we have to physically bring a plate with us?" And then, as you say, someone had to explain what it was. So, yeah. But no, sorry, we're getting distracted now. But as you say, different system. But how is lameness over there compared to over here?
As exactly as you find in the low-yielding extensive systems in Europe, just it's much less of a problem. It's not. It is an issue, but it's not the scale of the issue as in big, high-yielding Holsteins kept on concrete. So Y-line disease is the predominant lesion, and that's almost certainly just walking a long way on tracks of often dubious quality. But it's not to the same extent as rates in the UK. And you know that's something that the New Zealand industry thrives off. You know, we have this reputation for the extensive, low yielding, higher welfare type systems. You know, clearly that's an argument we can get into, but you know, as far as the consumer is concerned, that perception there.
Well, exactly. There's still that perception here of the old anchor adverts, because at the time, obviously, it was the war debt. So we had New Zealand butter, you know, green grass, et cetera, et cetera. But I was going to say, my understanding is that New Zealand is starting to feed their cows more in a more, I suppose, I was going to say what we would consider a traditional way then, rather than just grass, extensive grass. They are now buffering in a way they haven't before.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. But it's partly it's been down to the global dairy prices. You know, with dairy prices where they've been for the last year or two, people have been pushing for that extra bit of yield if they can just buffer feed and get a few more litres. It's absolutely been worth their while. But if you speak to a lot of the advisors down here, they have a really strong view on whether New Zealand is starting to feed too much, and it doesn't make financial sense. But people start getting in the habit of it. They say absolutely it has a place at the right price, milk price. But of course, you know, people start developing habits and they get used to doing things, don't they? And that's how these things perpetuate. And we're even starting to see one or two cow houses going in as well.
Oh, you've seen that in New Zealand as well, are you?
Yep. Not to what you would call a UK shed. But largely just a roof, no walls. But there is now some starting to get put in places.
I say I knew there was a few in sort of northern Vic and that have put a few in, you know, a few herds that I know. And when I said to somebody, why is it? Because I know a few people tried it when I was there, and as soon as milk price crashed, you know, it just doesn't work because Australia's always been cheap milk relatively compared to the world, because they haven't got the overheads. You literally, as you say, you literally have a shed to milk the cows and a shed to put your tractor in, and that's about it. It's the only sort of infrastructure and laneways sort of thing. But I mean, I said to someone, why are they doing it? He said, well, because they've realised these North American genetics they've invested in terms of the Holstein are just not being maximised on grazing. They know they need to bring them in and they need to manage them in a housed environment to maximise their potential.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. It's fascinating to see how these things develop. And of course, the other huge change that's occurred in New Zealand dairying over the last 20 years is the expansion of dairy farming into the South Island. So, you know, historically, it was the North Island, the better climate, where the vast majority of the dairy farming took place. But there's just been huge numbers of dairy conversions on the South Island over the last 20 plus years. And the climate gets much more comparable to sort of UK climate in parts of the South Island. And so, you do end up needing to have standoff pads when cows are dry in winter, because it just gets a lot wetter and colder down in the South Island. So the infrastructure starts coming into the system. But you're absolutely right. It still astounds me what constitutes a dairy farm in New Zealand, because it could literally be a milking shed and that's it.
Well, I think someone's even told me of the fact that they milked on a rotary once, and it literally had a piece of tin over cups on, a piece of tin over cups off, and the rest of it was just exposed into the open, and that was all they had.
So some of the other challenges that New Zealand dairy farmers are facing are quite similar to the UK, with sort of nutrient leaching and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about what the situation is?
Yeah, and I need to be careful because I'm going to start straying outside of my core area of expertise. But you're exactly right. There's a huge conversation going on now about the environmental impact of dairy farming in New Zealand. And I think what is quite different in New Zealand is that because all this has happened quite recently, a lot of the damage was done in the UK and other parts of Europe, a number of generations ago, wasn't it? And everything was converted, everything was chopped down, and the damage is sort of done. And I think what has been quite more confronting for a lot of people in New Zealand has been, we've seen how it's played out in other parts of the world, but we've still chosen to replicate some of the environmental impact in New Zealand. But of course, it's because it makes money, and we all need industries that keep our countries afloat. So certainly there is a lot of talk of impacts on the water table, particularly in Canterbury, in the South Island, and in one or two other locations. And so I think it's largely viewed that some of the dairy conversions that have happened in some parts of New Zealand probably weren't the wisest decisions that were made.
But that's no different to me. Comment I made earlier, and I remember hearing that sort of stuff when I was in Oz. There was part of where we were in North Queensland had only been cleared 10 years ago. I mean, it was only dry cow country, but you still looked at them and went, why the hell did they clear this? As you're, leaning as far back as you can on your bike to balance it or whatever. It's just madness, some of the places that they that were cleared. And you think, why did they even do it? But it is what it is.
Yeah, and New Zealand, it was more that there were dairy conversions from beef and sheep. So, the old beef and sheep units were progressively converted to dairy because it was more profitable than beef and sheep. And New Zealand's good at it. We're phenomenally good at dairy.
Oh, there's some good, as much as, begrudgingly I say it sometimes, there's a lot of good stuff come out in New Zealand. A lot of good research that then everyone else has to pay for, and New Zealand sits back and makes the money from. But hey, I'm not knocking you. Why not? If you can, make the most of it.
I'm glad you've mentioned the word research again, Andrew, because we were talking back when just a few moments ago about the lack of research getting back to farm. And there was a bit that I was particularly thinking, though, that Jon, you'd been involved with of the use of non-steroidals when treating lame cows. And I think that is one bit of research that has done really quite well at getting back to farm here in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was some of the follow-on work we did, where with the other thing we really realized when you look through the research literature was there was very little underpinning research describing the best treatment methods for lame cows. So that's not to say that the things we were doing were wrong. We just didn't know they were right. And we hadn't got the evidence, the really good quality evidence that demonstrated that. So again, that was a piece of AHDB funded research where we just tried to conduct some of the randomized trials to investigate the best treatment options for lame cows. Once we'd set off at them, you realize why nobody had really done them historically, because honestly, randomized treatment trials in lameness are really difficult. I won't bore you with the details. They're just really difficult to do. And one of the key outcomes was demonstrating that non-steroidals really help as a treatment option for lame cows. And then as soon as you say it seems blindingly obvious as soon as you say it. It's lameness is almost certainly an inflammatory disease. It's got an inflammatory component, and so if you control that inflammation, then it really helps with recovery and probably also long-term recovery. So reducing the amount of damage that gets done in the foot, and in addition, you also get the pain control, which we know lameness is painful. The reason the cows limp is because it's painful. It's a straight correlation. So it's a win-win, really.
Well, I'm saying that's knocked on now, because I know Ginny Sherwin now mentions that when she talks about the work for, heard her talk at HDB. Oh, heifers, wasn't it, that you should give freshly calved heifers non-steroidal, and it's shown that you have a much greater return into second lactation and subsequently onwards if you give those non-steroidals at calving for a heifer, because you're managing the pain of childbirth, I guess.
Yeah, and there's probably more to it than that, actually, Andrew. There seems to be something going on around parturition in the high yielding dairy cow. I've always been convinced that there's some underlying fundamental joining up theory which will describe all of the transition diseases that we see. It's such a dangerous period of time for the high yielding cow, that transition from dry through to early lactation. And all your listeners will know that's where we lose cows. It's in that period immediately after that parturition.
I was going to say, it's usually, certainly from wearing my cow signals hat, it's quoted as 80% of disease starts in that period. And so if we get that right, it will make such a difference.
Yeah. And again, some really nice work came out of other parts of the world, looking at inflammation associated with parturition and early lactation, and therefore probably the underlying reason why anti-inflammatories around calving help.
Now, you mentioned that you're not direct anymore, but you now influence. Now, you talk about the next generation of vets, but do you have any influence over some of the research that's being done at Massey? Because if you're controlling the purse strings, I'm sure you must have some not leaning, that's the wrong word, must have some influence over what does or doesn't get researched at the university.
No, I don't actually. No, it doesn't work like that. No, like most universities, it's largely where the money is, and of course that then comes down to funders. New Zealand's quite different from the UK in that there's a real strong separation between the Crown-owned, the government-owned research organisations and the universities. So a lot of New Zealand government-funded research takes place in the Crown-owned research organisations. Ag Research would probably be the one that people might be familiar with, although that's just been rebranded, actually. And so we don't get the same volume of research funding into the universities that I was familiar with in the UK because of that sort of separation. So we still do a lot of research, but certainly not quite to the same extent as we used to do in the UK.
What are numbers looking like for vets? Are people still interested, or is it, in large animal vet work over in New Zealand? Or like here, it seems to be some people just drift away from that, and it's more and more small animals. I realise the industry's changed in the last, 25, 30 years over here. But is there still an interest in New Zealand as a whole in that dairy industry, because it is such an economic factor for New Zealand?
Yeah, no, it's a really key difference between certainly the UK veterinary school outputs and what we do at Massey. So still about 50% of our graduates will go into mixed practice that would involve some farm work, which, there's nowhere in Europe or North America that would be anywhere near those sorts of levels. So, and it's because New Zealand is an island exporting nation, based predominantly on ruminant agriculture and increasingly horticulture and other things. But, just nowhere grows grass like New Zealand. We're just phenomenally good at growing grass. So all of our primary production, not all of it, a lot of our primary production based on ruminants. And of course, that means there's just millions of them, millions of sheep, millions of dairy, millions of beef. lot of deer, and so a lot of the vet work still remains in those rural communities servicing those farms. So we haven't seen the levels of movement towards companion animal veterinary work as yet as has happened in the UK.
So, John, one more question for you while I think about it. What questions are you still eager to explore? As you're not in research, but there must be something that still burns in you that goes, "Oh, I'd love to know what the answer to that is."
Well, we've sort of talked about it. The thing that I would still love to really understand, and I know there's a lot of work going on around the world, but is transition and early lactation. That transition and early lactation for high yielding dairy cow, it's a big, currently poorly understood area, and I think there's an awful lot more to understand. And the idea that there might be a unifying theory that underpins a lot of the diseases of early lactation, in terms of metritis, mastitis, ketosis, lameness, all of those diseases of early lactation that are so consequential for the cow. I just can't help but feel there's a unifying theory sitting underneath all of that somewhere.
You're starting to sound like a physicist who wants this one answer to one theory to everything.
Hey, I get to sound like a geeky academic at some points, at some parts of this, Andrew.
Am I allowed to throw one in there at that point then? Because I've got my latest theory, because I'm one of those that has these weird theories. My latest theory is that a lot of it is linked to gut health and thinking of sort of the leaky gut syndrome and that kind of thing. Do you think that we might be able to start relating some of these production diseases or transition diseases back to leaky gut and inflammation and stresses?
So it's that sort of idea, Sarah. Yeah, you're exactly right. And again, I need to be careful. Like I say, I'm afraid I'm off the tools now. So I bet there's been some really good work gone on in this area over the last 2 or 3 years. Will make its way out to the industry, but it's that sort of unifying theory that then underpins the systemic inflammation that we see in early around calving that then kicks on to all these diseases. Yeah, exactly right. My great friend and collaborator Martin Green always used to say, one of the best things we could do is to just stop doing new research and just apply what we already know properly on farm, and we'd be far better off than just continuing to research. We absolutely have to acknowledge that it's a big gap between research and practical on-farm application, and lots of people have spent a lot of time trying to work out what the best methods of translating pure research onto farm are. And fundamentally it's really difficult. It's really difficult because well, for a start, we're just very different people. Geeky academic researchers are very different people to applied practical farmers trying to make a living on farm, and that's a big gulf we've got to bridge, and we've got to find a way to do it. It's not easy.
Anyway, on that, I'm sort of looking at the time now and thinking it's probably time to wrap this up. Is any last words of wisdom, John? I mean, obviously you've gone to New Zealand. It sounds like you're absolutely loving it. But is there anything else that you'd like to share with people back? Because I know there are people who are interested to know what's happened to you since you disappeared to New Zealand.
Thank you, Andrew. What would I say? I would say New Zealand is a very long way away, as your listener will know. It is a long way away, and that's one of the big challenges about being on opposite sides of the planet. It's easy to think that you can maintain your networks and maintain influence and all those things, but it's really difficult. When I just started supporting the All Blacks, I realized that I fully transitioned, and when I finally acknowledged that I was a stronger supporter of the All Blacks than I was Wales, I realized that I'd become a Kiwi. It took a few years, but it's because of what you see around you. We don't hear the Northern Hemisphere news and sport like you do when you look at.
Say, John, that's because you're trying to attach yourself to a winners. Because let's be honest, Wales have been atrocious recently. Sorry to anybody that Wales that's listening to this, but losing, was it 73-0 or whatever it was the other day?
But I was just looking at a very interesting stat on social media just before I started speaking to you. Actually, looking at the number of wins in the Six Nations since 2011, and actually Wales still have a good record on that sort of timescale. But I accept the last few years has been pretty ugly.
But we've seen it before. Was it in the 80s and they came back and did all right? So everybody has their swings and roundabouts, but you're talking about the fundamentals of this. I mean, just organising this for anybody that hasn't realised, there's a 13-hour time difference between us here in the UK and John as we're recording this. So trying to find a time that fits around everybody has been a little bit of a challenge, but we've done it. And I'm really thankful for John for doing that with us. But, as you say, it is definitely, as you say, living halfway around the world, you don't keep in contact with people in the same way that you did. Definitely. I can completely agree with that one.
And you're exactly, it's the time difference that is the killer. It's fundamentally quite difficult to speak to people in the UK because it's either 11, 12 or 13 hours different. So it's sort of early mornings and early evenings. But no, we love New Zealand. New Zealand has been a really positive move. Massey has been a positive move. New Zealand has been a really positive move for me and the family. And our two kids are now firmly little Kiwis. Our boy, who was 4 when we left, has abstract memories of the UK, but our daughter, who was 2 now, merrily butchers vowels like any good Kiwi should. And we had an interesting time a few years ago where we finally realised that we didn't understand each other anymore because she was butchering her vowels so badly.
So we won't be seeing you move back to the UK anytime soon then, John?
No, I don't think so. We've moved our pensions, which probably is a reasonably permanent move. You never know. You never know. You never know where life takes you. But I think the other thing that moving to New Zealand really did was made me realise what a really fascinating part of the world this is. The Asia Pacific. And the development of East and Southeast Asia and the rise of that region, it's fascinating to watch from this part of the world. And I really enjoy being in New Zealand. It's a great place to live.
Sarah?
Well, maybe I get to not have one of my biggest regrets, and maybe one day I might make it to New Zealand. And if you're still at Massey, maybe I can look you up.
You would always be very welcome at Massey, Sarah. So we're really strong in agriculture, animal science, veterinary science. We are the university in New Zealand that does land-based science, and so you'd fit right in. You'd be perfect.
Well, on that, I guess it's time we wrap this up. So I'd, again, just like to thank John. It's been fantastic. We've had a few challenges to make it happen, but it's made it happen. It's been wonderful catch up because I know I really haven't seen you probably since you did that presentation, but certainly still follow you on LinkedIn and what you're doing down there. So thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated and it's been great to talk to you. And I suppose it's time to say Happy Christmas to all our listeners and a Happy New Year. And I hope you have some time with your friends and family and get to enjoy yourselves. But other than that, Happy Christmas.
We'll be on the beach. You enjoy the cold.
Do you know what? That was the weirdest thing when I was in Australia was, having Christmas in like 30-degree heat. And you're just like, it's just not Christmas. So everywhere's tinsel and Father Christmas in his Speedos or, swimming trunks or whatever. And it's just like, this is weird. It should be cold and miserable and wet. And it's not. And it's just like, anyway. So on that note, I guess it's a goodbye from me.
Thank you, John. It's goodbye from me too.
Thank you both. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses, or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.